It's your time for Chai with Nanice. Get ready for substance, clarity, change, and especially empowerment. Get ready to turn over stones, uncover stories, and get to the heart of the matter in every area of your life. Any mood runs, any emotion flies, and your dreams are within your grasp. There are no limits or boundaries, and your comfort zone is out of reach, yet it's the safest place you will ever be. Come in, sit down, and have some chai with Nanice.
Hi everyone, I'm Nanice, and you are listening to Chai with Nanice. Today's show is Life After Abuse. Have you ever been abused? With the growing statistics, there's a good chance that you have been abused in one way or another. Maybe you were abused as a child like my guest here today, or maybe you were involved in an abusive relationship like myself. Maybe you're even being abused now. This show is for you. It's not your typical forum for abuse. We're not addressing all the issues and challenges of abuse and what it means to be abused. There are many valuable forums for that. We are talking about life after abuse. Life does not end with abuse. For those of us who somehow survive and find ourselves out in the world after abuse, I am here to say that it is not only possible to survive, you can thrive. Abuse doesn't make you a marked woman or man. Abuse does not isolate you, discriminate you, or keep you from living your dreams. These are all things that you do to yourself in order to protect yourself. And this is the real abuse because it stops you from living the life you are meant to live. The truth is, even those who haven't been abused have excuses for not living their dreams. We just seem to have better ones, don't we? But maybe it's time to stop identifying ourselves with our wounds and issues and start identifying ourselves with our strengths and with our courage, and to actually use everything we learned about ourselves to find our place in the world and help others to do the same. Life awaits and begs to be lived through you. If you are currently being abused, please find a local crisis center and get the help you need to get out. Get a plan, get support, allow a vision for the future to pull you forward, and to imagine freedom. If you can't reach out for yourself, tell someone you trust and ask them to find help. Do whatever it takes to save your life, because in the end, you are the only one who can do it. And you can do it. I know this to be true. My story actually started when I was about 16 years old, and I found myself in a horrifically abusive relationship, one that I nearly did not survive. My life was threatened on a regular basis, and I know that when it finally ended, I was kind of shell-shocked for a long time, and I didn't know what to expect from that moment on. I didn't know that I could have a full, rich life. I had hoped and prayed, but I really couldn't find my way back to that for many, many years. And I'm here to say that not only did I find my way to a life that is full and amazing, but I actually learned from everything that I went through, and the same tools that I used to survive, I was able to take and use to thrive. And my guest here today has a similar story. She actually was a child when the abuse went on. And not only has she survived the abuse, but she is a thriving young woman who has a beautiful, brilliant future ahead of us. Ahead of her, not ahead of us. I have my own future ahead of me. She has her own future ahead of her. She is my daughter-in-law, though, so I guess the us is appropriate there, too. I'd like to introduce April Perry Kreitzer, and she is also a facilitator on Facebooks for discovering your power after abuse. April?
Yes, thank you so much. I am so happy to be on your show again, so thank you.
Thank you. So we have a lot to talk about today, and I'm really excited about this show because there's a lot of people out there who have suffered at the hands of abuse, and many of them are no longer in abusive relationships, but they feel paralyzed by the abuse, and they don't know how to move on past it. And as we both know, years tick by very, very quickly, and before we know it, we're looking back on a life, and not only was it a life that had abuse, but it was a life that we stopped living because of the abuse. Is this something that you can relate to or comment on?
Oh, yes. And, it just gets to the point, even after the abuse has passed, that we continue to live in that pattern and that victim, and that we just never get to live our own lives, that we just feel lost. We feel like there's nothing left to us. Mm-hmm. And I have learned from experience that you can have everything. You can have dreams. You can do anything that you want to, and you can get yourself out of that victim role.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that victim role, we've heard a lot in the media over the years about, being the victim, playing the victim. But I think that unless you have been the victim, you really don't know what that is, and you really don't know what that means to pull yourself out of. Because it's not just an experience that you go through. It's almost like a persona that you put on, that you were the victim in one situation, and that means that you have a victim energy about you for the rest of your life. What do you think about that?
Yeah, and it just gets to the point where the victim role becomes an excuse, where something that you may want to do, but you just keep putting yourself, no, I'm damaged, and it just becomes where you might not be doing what you want to do in your life, and it's an easy excuse to not live your dreams. Mm-hmm. That's what I found personally for me.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And I found that too. Now, I'm going to imagine that there's a lot of people out there thinking that they really are victims, and that it's not an image, it's not a role, but, they've been victimized. Maybe they've had a situation where they were physically or emotionally abused in a relationship, or they were raped, or they were sexually molested as a child. And it's hard for many of those people to imagine that they're not a victim, that they truly feel and can give proof to anyone who's willing to listen that they are in fact a victim. So how does somebody start to unravel or loosen that idea that maybe they are not a victim, maybe they can be something more than a victim, maybe they can create an entire life that does not revolve around being a victim? What do you think about that, April?
Well, personally, what I found through my own situation and going through all the years of abuse, I started looking at my beliefs and really just sat down and looked at them. And from just really looking at what I believed, I found that most of them I didn't actually really believe, even though I tried to find reasons to make it true. But once I really looked at it, it wasn't something that I could actually see. Mm-hmm. And then I got to see my own point of view, how I've abused myself over the years, how I've put myself down, how I haven't moved forward. And the more that I really looked at it, I saw that I was in my own way, and that nobody, not anyone, could actually was causing me the problems or the damage that I myself was. And so for me, once I was able to really look at that, then I saw that I victimized myself. Once I did that, then I was able to get out of that victim role.
Yeah, because really that's what happens. The abuse ends at some point, and we go on abusing ourselves. So it's like somebody like yourself who's been abused as a child. What happens is we take on everything that the abuser said to us, everything that the abuser did to us, and we end up doing that to ourselves. And what that might look like later in life is that we have a lot of negative self-talk going on, or we are always putting ourselves down, or we have created such boundaries and limitations because we really do believe that we're stupid and incapable because somebody else spent years telling us that, and now we keep telling it to ourselves. And to me, that's the real abuse. Somebody can abuse you once in a situation of rape, for example. Generally, it's something that happens one time, and yet the person who's been raped spends the rest of their lives raping themselves. Now, I do realize that there's a lot of people listening to this who have maybe been in those situations, or they know somebody in that situation, and they're thinking, well, it's something like that, that's so horrific, and, well, of course, you just don't get over that. You don't get over that overnight. And I totally agree. You don't get over it overnight. But what many of us end up doing, and I was a victim of this myself, is we make ourselves the victim. So we keep perpetuating the abuse to ourselves over and over and over and over again. And so not only does that initial abuse never have a chance to heal, but we are embedding it further and further and further into our consciousness to the point where our identity starts to get wrapped up with being a victim, because we keep making ourselves a victim. And one of the first steps to overcome them, like April said, was to recognize that there's a second abuse that's going on. And it might even be a third abuse, because there might be other people involved in the abuse. But at some point, the real abuser is you. And I know that's a hard thing to listen to, but it also could be a huge wake-up call, because when you realize that you are the one who's been abusing yourself all these years, then guess what? Then you have the opportunity to stop doing that. Then you have the opportunity to do something else, to do something different. Then you have the opportunity to start healing. But it only happens when you take responsibility for your own life and for your own abuse of you. Is there anything you'd like to add to that, April?
I think that was really well said. And I think from going through the experience myself, one thing I would add is there's always, and especially if yourself, if you're going through it, or a big thing is a loved one, and a lot of people just don't know how to help that person. And honestly, I would say the biggest thing is a listening ear. I know when I was going through it, I didn't really want anyone to tell me that it was going to be all right, it was going to be better. I just wanted someone to listen to me, to hear how I felt. And I think that's honestly the best thing you can do, is give yourself that space that, yes, it will hurt. And yes, there will be pain there. But honestly, just feeling it is really the best thing I think you can do. And the best thing you can help someone is just by being that listening ear.
Yeah, yeah. So what does it do? What did it do to you when you finally felt like somebody was listening to you? What did that do to you? Because I know that was after the abuse was actually over that you first had the experience of someone hearing you.
I had a really good friend, and I was thinking about that the other day. I went to all these therapists that were well-trained, and they could not help me. And I actually just had one friend that would just listen to me, and I felt so honored that he would just listen to me, not knowing what to say. He never tried to make it better. He just listened to me, and with him just listening to me, I was able to just naturally heal. It just, I felt that there was just something greater, and just by speaking out, I felt better. And that's all it took, and nothing really was said other than that. So
I'm hearing you say that he just created the space, the safe space for you just to talk, and he didn't do any magic, and he didn't have any answers. He just validated your experience by his presence. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's exactly correct.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is that that's not only a huge gift for somebody who's been abused, but that's a huge gift for anybody, because what we truly want on a deeply intrinsic level is just the space to be heard. And that's often a gift that we don't even give ourselves. We don't even sit down and listen to ourselves. Very often, we've got a lot of stuff going on, especially when we've been abused, and we block it out, we shut it off, we push it down, we do all sorts of things with it. But very rarely do we ever give ourselves space just to experience it. And your friend gave you this gift by giving you his presence, by giving you space to be able to explore it and put some light on it. But a lot of times, there isn't anybody that we can really turn to. There's people in our lives that tell, oh, it'll be okay, or they downplay it, oh, it wasn't that bad, oh, you're making that up, or they feel uncomfortable themselves, or maybe they've been abused and they're in denial, and they don't want to hear about your abuse. So if there's no one else, there is one person who's always there, and that's you. And I do believe that that's the greatest gift that we can really give to ourselves, whether we've been abused or not, just to be able to listen to our experience, just to be able to give ourselves some time, and to be able to give ourselves the presence and validate what it is that we've been through. Because very often something happens, and one of the things that we do is we rationalize it. Oh, it wasn't that bad. Oh, I have to get over it. Oh, no one will understand. It was my fault. So we end up doing all these blame, shame, and pushing down types of coping mechanisms. And what we end up with is just being blocked and locked and not being able to move forward. And so one of the first things that you can do is actually just acknowledge it to yourself. Just be your own best friend. Listen to yourself. If there's someone else there who can listen to you, that's great. That's wonderful. But even if there is, until you allow yourself the time and the respect to start listening to you and start honoring your experience, those experiences get locked into place and they keep us from moving forward. It's not until we actually start validating ourselves and acknowledging what we've gone through that we can start letting go and we can start healing. And that does take time, but the thing is, the right time is always now. That's the beauty of it. There's never a better time to start than right this moment. Even if you're still in an abusive relationship or you've been out of one for 20 or 30 years, where you start to heal is in listening to yourself and listening to your needs and listening to your experience and not judging it and not putting it down and not trying to change it in any way, not trying to make yourself wrong. Because I think a lot of times that's what we do. And tell me if you agree with this, April, that a lot of times what we do is we try to make our experience wrong. And what that does is that actually locks it in place, because as soon as we try to make ourselves wrong, what happens? There's a part of us that has to prove it's right and holds on to the issues and the pain even more. So be like, like if your child came in and said, I hurt my knee, and you said, oh, it doesn't look that bad, it's fine. What does that child do? That child cries even harder and longer until it gets the recognition and validation that knee is in fact bruised. But as soon as you go, oh, your knee, that must hurt really bad. Oh, that's, I can really empathize with you. Then suddenly, before you know it, that child's out running and playing again. They don't have to hold on to the fact that they're injured. And it's the same with us. As long as we're putting ourselves down, as long as we're denying our experience or saying, oh, it wasn't that bad, I should be over it by now, or whatever it is that we're doing, we have to stand up for ourselves. We have to, somewhere in our bodies and our minds and our spirits, hold on to the experience just to prove that it happened, just to prove that we were injured. But as soon as we start listening to ourselves, everything starts to change. Then our experience can start loosening. Then we don't have to hold on to it so tightly. Then we can start introducing other concepts and other ideas. But until we get to that place where we feel heard by ourselves, there's no moving past that. There's no getting around that. And I truly believe that that's one of the magic tricks, so to speak, to beginning the healing process. So April, when your friend first started, listening to you, did you feel like there was a shift in you where you actually started listening to yourself even more?
Yeah, and for the longest time, I even got to the point before where I was even questioning myself, just kind of similar to what you were just talking about, that because I just had this belief that no one believed me. So what I was really believing is I didn't believe myself, and I had to try to prove that there was this pain, that there was this hurt, there was this abuse there, and I had to prove it even more to myself. And then as he started to listen to me, I started to validate me as a person, my strength, my wisdom, everything that I have. I began to see that inside of me, and it just gave me that will, that strength to know that like you said, I wasn't just going to overcome it. I was going to thrive from it.
Yeah. Yes, beautiful. And so what happens to a person's dreams, do you think, when they're going through an abusive situation, or what happens to their dreams once they're out of the abuse?
Well, for me, what I went through was I began to even question my life, that it didn't have value, that I didn't have value, that I couldn't do anything. So even my dreams that I had, I felt like I couldn't do them. I wasn't capable of it, that I didn't deserve it, that I wasn't worth it. And so I can speak for myself, but I think a lot of women, they start questioning themselves. So then it's like the dreams become on the back burner, that they feel like they're not deserving of it. Right.
Because when we look at dreams, what's required in order to create and live out a dream is you. And if you're still beating yourself up, or if your self-esteem is so low that you can barely look at yourself, and I mean that both, in the mirror and look at yourself inside, then there's no way that you can allow a dream to move through you, because that's exactly what dreams do. Dreams have a life of their own, and they work through us. And if we're hollow inside, or if our self-esteem is so damaged because of abuse, there's no way that dream could possibly move through us. There's nothing there for it to move through. And so when someone comes out of abuse, it's vital to spend some time first really validating yourself and your experience, as we talked about, but then starting to discover what it means to be full, what it means to have self-esteem or soul esteem, or what I refer to as soul worth, which is not dependent on anything that happens in the outside world, which I'd love to talk a little bit about tonight as well. And once we start to really fill ourselves with us, then what begins to happen is that the dreams that have been waiting for us, because they don't go anywhere. That's the interesting thing about dreams. If it's really a dream, it will wait for you. It will not go anywhere. So once we start to fill ourselves with us, then what happens is now the dream has some place to go. It has a way to work through you and a way to come out of you and a way to be expressed in your life. But before you really look inside, before you acknowledge, validate, before you start to build yourself up from the inside out, there's no place for that dream. There's no way for that dream to work through you. What do you think about that, April? Does that feel right to you, or have you had a different experience?
That's exactly the experience I've had. Yeah, it's just, you said it very beautifully.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I touched upon this idea of soul worth, which you and I have spoke about for years, and it's an interesting thing because, well, I got out of my abusive relationship, and don't you like how I say my abusive relationship? Like, it was mine, I owned it. You can still, after all these years, hear identification with it in my words, and that's what I think we all have a tendency to do. Regardless, so I got out of my abusive relationship, and one of the things that I first decided to do is to really develop this thing called self-esteem. And I was in a unique situation because just a few months after I escaped, and it wasn't escape, this abusive relationship, I got pregnant with my son, who's now 27. And I decided to have the child. And I thought to myself, what is the one thing that I want to give him? And the one thing that I wanted to give him more than anything else was self-esteem. The problem was I personally didn't have a clue what it was or how to get it. And it certainly wasn't anything I could go to the local 5 and 10 and buy. So from that moment, I went on this search for self-esteem. And I spent many, many, many years trying to figure it out and trying to get it for myself. And ultimately, I did a really good job. But at some point in my journey, what I realized was that this thing that I discovered to be self-esteem seemed to be dependent on what happened in the external world. So in other words, if I was successful, if I had money, if things were going good, if people liked me, if I had a good hair day and the scale said what I wanted it to say, then I could feel good about myself. But if any of those things did not line up the way I wanted them to line up, then it was a bad day. And so I realized after a few years going in that direction that there was a hole in the theory, and it was a big hole because everything, including me, was falling out the bottom, and what I ended up looking at on the sidewalk was a big lump of shit, which didn't mean much in the end. So I realized that I had to rethink it. And I also realized that idea of self-esteem was exactly what got me into the abusive relationship in the first place, and that was this looking for my sense of wealth, my sense of worth outside of myself. And once I realized that true self-esteem cannot be found outside of yourself, then I started to fill myself with me. I started to develop a whole new identity where ultimately on a path of spirituality, what I discovered is that their only real sense of worth comes from soul worth, which is not dependent on anyone or anything and allows for immense amount of failure, doesn't need any success, doesn't need any validation, it doesn't need anything. It's just this true knowing of who you really are. And when you find that, then there's nothing else to do. Well, once I understood that, then my whole life changed. Then I was able to look back, and even when, I was 16, 17 years old and still in the abusive relationship, what I was able to do was realize that even then, when I didn't yet know it, that I still had immeasurable and immense value and worth that was not dependent on anything or anyone. I began to realize that even as I was being thrown out of cars and suffocated and had all sorts of horrific abuse happen to me, that I was no less worthy than I was decades later when I realized that my worth existed. The knowing that your worth is intrinsic changes everything, because then there's nothing to do, there's nothing to prove, and in fact, there's nothing to heal. And I think when we get to that place where we really discover that for ourselves, then everything changes, life changes, we change, and there's no going back. And so, April, so when we talk about, self-esteem versus this idea of soul esteem or soul worth, tell me, where are you on that spectrum?
Actually, that's changed a lot, and I know we did, our first show was on the self-esteem.
Yes.
And a lot has just changed since then that I've noticed, and a lot of what I've done in my life goes back to what you were saying, that when I felt successful, when I felt like I was achieving a lot of my own expectations, then I could feel good about myself.
Yeah.
But it was all external.
Mm-hmm.
And even knowing inside that there was more to it than that, I always got to this point, as you know from me, that
Yes.
I was trying to always bypass it.
Mm-hmm.
I was trying to fast forward what I already knew.
Mm-hmm.
And I really didn't have the ability of really experiencing it. And so for me, these last few weeks, it was just getting to the point of complete surrendering and knowing that everything, and I mean absolutely everything in this world, has that soul, that, and we're all everything. And once I was able to get to that point, I could see no failure.
Yes.
I mean, you can't.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, I've been able to see that life as I know it, that I can't do any wrong, and that's just freed up a lot for me in the sense of knowing how great I am.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just changed everything in my life as far as how I feel about myself, and knowing that I don't need external things to make my life matter anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I'm sure that there's a lot of people listening, and they're thinking, okay, so how do I do that? It's all words and it's airy-fairy, and how do I do that? How do I find that sense of worth that is indestructible and not dependent on anyone or anything? And how did you find it, April?
It just came to this place of complete surrendering, and it took a long time for me, but once I was able to get to that place, I could just, and it really is just looking and not telling a story or taking any thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
The best way for me to describe it is I would look at my life or something that I was kind of focusing on, and if I just looked at it in a third-party way without any judgment, then I could see what it really was.
Yeah.
But once you bring yourself into it and your thoughts and your story, then I think that's what you're really focusing on.
Right.
So my advice is to look at it from a third party.
So like a non-judgmental perspective, a non-judgmental observer, that type of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Like no thought on what it really is.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
and
Yes.
just looking.
Yeah. Because really the only thing that ever causes us pain is our story about it. It's not the actual thing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so it's like if we can remove our story and we can just look at for what it is without the story, which is a very hard thing to do, then suddenly it changes its whole look. It changes its whole energy. And when we do tell stories, because we tell stories about everything in our life, but when we can step back, and just remove the story and just look at it, then what happens is our negative beliefs go away about it, our fears, our sense of powerlessness, all of that goes away too. And what we're left with is really what we talked about last week, like a pure innocence to it. And it becomes a whole new experience. And then we get it to be whatever it is, and whatever it is quickly changes. When we put a story on something, like when we say, I was abused and I'm a victim, what happens is that story gets locked into place. And once we tell a story like I'm a victim, we actually attract people and situations to prove that that's true. And before we know it, we have 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, a lifetime, we can prove that we were in fact a victim, because this great abundant universe will give exactly what it is to us that we ask for. And if we're saying I am a victim, the universe will oblige and say, okay, here you go. Now, when we remove the story, in this case, it's victimhood. When we remove the story of victimhood, what happens is things start to loosen. And when we start to identify ourselves as being triumphant or being a victor or being free or being worthy unconditionally, then something else begins to happen. And the universe conspires to make us right in that way. And then what we end up with is years and hopefully even a life that proves that we are victorious, that proves that we are triumphant, that proves that, yes, we are worthy of whatever it is that we desire, and then some. And that's the beauty. That's the beauty. What we don't realize is that when we get stuck in cycles of like victimhood and loss and worthlessness and powerlessness, is that we will keep energetically attracting more of the same until we finally say, okay, I'm done, I've had enough, and I want to change the story. And as soon as, I'm talking about the instant, the second that you decide to change the story, your life changes. In fact, the instant that you start questioning the story, your life changes. And so I guess the biggest challenge that I would have for you, the listeners here today, is to start questioning the stories that you have. One of my books that I've written is called Even Gandhi Got Hungry and Buddha Got Mad. And a good part of the book is just about deciphering your stories, to really start looking at the stories that you've been telling yourself up to now and the stories that keep replaying themselves, and really the stories that you are done with because you know the outcome already and you want to move on to something else. And the beauty in that is once we identify our stories and decide that we want to let go of the stories, then we get to create whole new stories, and we get to base a life on amazing, fantastic, superb, magnificent stories. And like I said, the universe will conspire to make them happen as much as it has made the story of victimhood happen. What I found over my years working as a coach and working with people all around the world is that there's really only 4 types of disempowering beliefs. And they are loss, victimhood, worthiness, and powerlessness. Every disempowering belief will fall into one of those 4 categories. What's interesting with people who have been abused is that they have more stories falling into more categories than anyone else, which is one of the reasons why it's so hard to get on with life, and why they get stuck perpetually in lifetimes that are really challenging and difficult and thick and, meaningless. It's because there are so many negative stories running, so many stories of, yes, the loss, the victimhood, the worthiness, the powerlessness. And so when you can stop and say, I'm ready for another story, I'm ready to let go of the identification with these stories, then that's when your life begins to change. And so one of the first things to do, in addition to the other steps that we talked about tonight, is to start loosening the story, start questioning the story, and start thinking about what it is that you really want in your life. In other words, as you loosen the story of victimhood and loss and all those things, you start to create a space within yourself that invites in those old dreams and desires, and maybe even dreams and desires that you haven't even yet thought of or you haven't yet imagined. And it allows them the space and the substance to grab onto inside of you to start creating themselves in your life and to start creating a life based on them. And that's when the true magic happens. And so, April, you've got a lot of beautiful things going on in your life right now. And one of the things is you've actually just started a forum on Facebook for women, for men who are looking. Is it for women and for men, or is it just for women? I'm sorry.
I'm going to have it more based for women right now.
For women. Okay, great.
Uh-huh.
And absolutely, men are just as much abused as women are. I think women are more open to reaching out and looking for this type of forum. So I totally understand why it's geared for women right now. And if I understand it correctly, you have created this forum for women to come forward and to share in their experiences with the sole intention of rediscovering their power out in the world and to start moving in that direction. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more? And what I really would love for you to share is how you got to this place and what your vision is, and, where's it coming from inside you now versus when you just had the thought about it maybe years ago?
Yeah, the way I came up with it, I've actually been wanting to do it for years, and my setback kind of goes back to the whole dreams and kind of putting it on the back burner and thinking that I had to have something more inside of me before I could get started on it. And I just got to this place of knowing that I had the skills and I had the strength and I had the wisdom within me now. Mm-hmm. And for me personally, and I know a lot of women have gone through the same thing, this feeling of complete alone. I felt that I didn't have the resources. I didn't have the place to get help. Even the therapists that I would go to, they would just tell me they couldn't help me. They didn't even try to help me. And so I just felt completely alone. So my goals for creating this forum is to have that support, that other women can know that there are other women out there, and that there are resources out there that they can share, that there's no judgment, and also just helping to help women that need some help, that they can find that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so that's my goals, is just to have the support system. The way to get into it is if you just go to Facebook.com, you do have to sign up to be a member. However, it is free, and it's very easy to set up. And once you're a member, they have a search. And if you put in Rediscovering Your Power After Abuse, you can find my forum on my message board, and anyone's welcome to share.
Yeah. And you can also contact me at Nanice at Nanice.com, and I can forward you the information too as well. So April, I know that this is a new forum that you just started, but what is your vision for it? What do you see it becoming?
I actually what I see as far as a vision, I want to get to the point where there can be monthly teleconferences. Mm-hmm. I see seminars coming out of it, kind of just a good resource for a one-stop place where people can find people to talk to, that there's articles, that there's that support, just basically a one-stop place where someone needs information or needs support, or just a place that they feel comfortable with. And mm-hmm. that's my vision. And I just want to see to the point where there's thousands of people on the site.
Mhm. Yeah. And what do you think it does when many people who have had similar experiences get together at a forum?
I think it just brings this positive light that there is more after abuse, mm-hmm. and that their life is just beginning, and how exciting and what they can do. And it's just rediscovering yourself and who you are and your strength. And I think as you get more people together, they can see how we really are just one.
Yes.
That we're all this amazing, great power, all of us.
Yes. Yes. Because sometimes before we're ready to see our own greatness, it's easy to see someone else's. And if you can witness the strength and power of someone else who's gone through something similar to you and start to say to yourself, oh, well, if they can do it, maybe I can do it too. That starts to loosen the possibility that you can live your dream, that not only can you survive, but you can thrive and you can be the best you've ever been. Abuse is not a prison. Abuse is not a permanent life unless you choose it to be. And no matter what someone has done to you, whether it was 2 days ago, 2 years ago, or 20 years ago, the greatest abuse that could ever happen to you is the abuse that you do to yourself. And again, that's in how you talk to yourself, how you treat yourself, how you think about yourself, how you deny yourself. And when we finally make the decision to stop abusing ourselves and to start treating ourselves with respect and honor, then the entire world changes. Nothing can be the same after that. But until it does, well, until it does. You know, it's really interesting because I imagine, you know, myself now and who I see myself to be now is just somebody that loves themselves and really cares about themselves and honors themselves in every way. And the idea that somebody would or could abuse me now is ridiculous. And if I take the same qualities that I have now and apply them to that 16-year-old who was abused, there's no way that someone could have abused her either. And so knowing that, what it makes me think is that there's no way that we can be abused by anybody else in the world unless at some level we are abusing ourselves. And maybe the best way to stop abuse, if in fact you are in a relationship where you are still being abused, maybe the best way to stop the abuse that you're experiencing from someone else is to first stop it on the inside. Maybe the best thing to do is to start honoring yourself and respecting yourself and letting that grow and grow and grow, because it will. Once you give it a little space, it won't stop growing until one day you wake up and you look back at your life and wow, you are the person you always dreamed yourself to be. And here you are. And April, I'm imagining that this is true for you too, that when you wake up in the morning now and you look in the mirror, whether it's a physical mirror or the proverbial mirror, that you say, wow, this is the person that I always dreamed myself to be. Does that resonate with you?
Yes, it has, especially, and actually all this kind of really came into place for me starting on New Year's, which is just so amazing for me. But yeah, it's just knowing that I have the strength, that I don't have to do anything, that it's all inside of me now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, you know, there's people out there listening and they're going, I don't have to do anything. Well, what the shit does that mean? And of course I have to do something. But so in your words, what does that mean, that you don't have to do anything?
Well, for me personally, what I would keep thinking is that I had to have schooling or that I had to have certain skills, that there had to be more to me. And actually it's kind of funny because I kind of got into this perspective that kind of like with Spider-Man, that a special spider had to bite me and then all of a sudden I would be this amazing person, and it never occurred to me that I already am that. Mm-hmm. That I don't have to have any special powers, that I don't have to have any schooling, I don't have to do any of that. Mm-hmm.
So then what is it that you don't do, or what is it that you do? What is it? People are questioning that. So, okay, so then what?
It's just knowing, it kind of goes off kind of more of this intuitive that I just know inside of me of what my desires are. I know what my dreams are, and I don't have to know the answers. In fact, I don't.
Yeah.
But also just knowing that I'm led into the right direction, and I've just been going along with that.
Yeah. Yes. Beautifully said. Because no matter how much self-worth we have, or how much soul worth we recognize, that we are divinely guided by some higher power that is constantly 24 hours a day, 7 days a week working through us and guiding us in our favor. And when that greater power guides us in our favor, that greater power is also supporting everybody else and everything else on the planet as well, because we truly are one. And I think what happens is when we give up this idea that we have to do everything, or that we have to meet certain standards or certain expectations or certain set of requirements, when we give all that up and we just surrender to who we really are, we surrender to this higher power, we get out of our own way, then what happens is this greater power works through us and directs us and inspires us to take action, to move in this way, to move in that way. But before that happens, before we surrender and allow this greater power to run our lives, we're just doing from our small little mind that can't possibly perceive the potential that exists for us even now in our smallness. And the interesting thing is that and people may have heard me talk about this before on the air, that things are changing now. The energies on the planet, they're loosening. Things are changing. So it's like things that you may have tried in the past, suddenly they're happening quicker and faster now, because when we choose a direction, when we say yes to something, when we say yes to ourselves, then suddenly magic can happen, that this greater force can work through us. And so a huge piece in this process of thriving past abuse and discovering your power is surrendering to who you really are, to surrendering to your higher power and allowing this higher power to begin to heal you, begin to loosen your beliefs and your stories, and to begin to allow your dreams to start flowing and floating through you and to manifest in reality. And so if there's ever been a time, the time is now to start thinking that, there's something more out there and there's something more inside me. And saying yes to your life, saying yes to you. And this is the beauty of who you really are. April, thank you so much for being on the air tonight. It has been an absolute pleasure. Is there anything that you'd like to add before I close?
I think everything's just been beautifully said, and I'm so grateful to be on your show, and hope to be on again soon.
You absolutely will be. Thank you so much. You've added so much, and not just to the show, but to my process and my experience of what it means to survive and thrive after abuse. Thank you.
Thank you.
And if you'd like to get in touch with April, you can go to Facebook and just search for Discover Your Power, or you can contact me at Nanice at Nanice.com. That's Nanice at Nanice.com. Can you imagine what would happen if we started supporting each other in the living of our lives? Can you imagine the good you can do for another by encouraging him or her to move past fears and boundaries and start living a life that even today is calling? Can you imagine if you did this for yourself? Imagine a life where you stopped abusing yourself and making yourself wrong, making yourself small and giving your power away to the past or fear or the future. It's time to start supporting yourself like you would support someone else. It's time to stop taking over the job of the abuser and free yourself to live the life that is waiting for you. If you are strong enough to survive, you're strong enough to thrive. Your life has been given you everything you need to live an extraordinary life. And all you have to do is say yes to it and start responding to that small but wise voice inside you that knows the way and knows what you are capable of. It's time. You have been listening to Chai with Nanice. I'm Nanice.
Thank you for having Chai with Nanice. Please go to www.nanice.com for great free stuff that will empower you to live your best possible life. Free books, articles, shows, meditation audios, and so much more at nanice.com. That's Nanice.com. Nanice's books are also available in all major bookstores and Amazon. Check out The Infinite Power of You, Even Gandhi Got Hungry and Buddha Got Mad, Zest Point, Lip Prints, and many others by Nanice Ellis. To find out about one-on-one coaching and how Nanice can personally coach you to experience your best life possible, please email mybestlife@nanice.com.